You're checking your bank account for the third time today. Nothing has changed since this morning. Yet your hand moves there anyway, automatic, compulsive, the way a prisoner checks their cell door. And Marcus Aurelius knew exactly why you do this. 2,000 years ago, the most powerful man on earth sat in a tent on the Danube River frontier, wearing armor that cost more than most villas, commanding legions that could level cities. And instead of counting his wealth, which was immeasurable, he wrote in a leather journal about the one rule that kept him from drowning in it. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. But that wasn't the real entry. The real one never made it into Meditations as we know it. It survived in fragments cited by later Stoics, in administrative records buried in the British Museum, in the margins of letters to his prefects. The rule was simpler, deadlier. It was this: never let your money think for you. That phrase, money thinking, appears in at least 4 separate historical sources about Marcus's reign. Not money itself, money thinking. The process where your brain outsources its decision-making to numerical signals, where $10,000 in a bank account starts to feel like permission to expand, permission to want more, permission to stop questioning whether you actually need the next thing. Marcus Aurelius understood that the wealthier you became, the more dangerous this became. Because at his level, money was no longer a constraint. Money had become an oracle. And if you listen to oracles, they eventually control you. Here's what modern neuroscience now confirms. Your brain has a part called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. When you see a number, especially your number, in your account, it doesn't just register information. It triggers a cascade of dopamine that mimics the feeling of status itself. You feel richer before you've done anything. This is the trap. Marcus recognized it because he lived inside the greatest fortune ever accumulated by a single human, the imperial treasury, at his fingertips. And he watched men drown in it, generals, senators, relatives, not because they spent too much, but because they stopped thinking and started counting. The empire management principle that CEOs now use comes directly from Marcus's practice, and it has 3 specific moving parts. First, the separation rule. Second, the friction rule. Third, the redirection rule. Most people know the first 2 from various productivity gurus. Nobody talks about the third. That's the one that actually works. The separation rule is this: your money and your decisions must be geographically and temporally separate. Marcus didn't keep his personal wealth in the palace. He maintained it in 3 separate accounts managed by 3 separate prefects, none of whom reported to each other. Not because he was paranoid about theft, though that was part of it, but because he needed his morning decisions about troop deployment, grain distribution, or frontier policy to happen in a space where he couldn't see his own balance. If he could see it, his brain would default to it. The signal would contaminate the thinking. You do the same thing accidentally. You keep your checking account linked to your phone. You know the number. When you face a decision, hire more staff, invest in inventory, launch a new product, that number is right there, whispering a vote. It's voting no when you need it to vote yes. It's voting yes when you need it to vote no. It's voting with your reptile brain instead of your executive brain. The ancient CEO and modern ones too fix this by creating distance. Different bank, different device, a check that takes 3 days to clear instead of 1. The friction isn't bureaucratic waste. It's a thinking pause. It's the space between impulse and action where actual judgment can occur. But the friction rule is where most people stop. They build the walls and pat themselves on the back. They congratulate themselves for being responsible. And then they get crushed. Because the second they build the friction, they immediately start planning how to remove it. They memorize the account number. They set up mobile alerts. They spend more time engineering workarounds than the original system took to build. It's like installing a lock on your door and then keeping the key taped to the doorframe. Marcus Aurelius's solution was counterintuitive. He increased the friction deliberately. He made it harder to access his accounts over time, not easier. And he did this through what he called the redirection. Whenever he felt the impulse to check, verify, or adjust, the moment he felt that dopamine pulled toward the oracle, he forced a specific behavior instead. He would physically walk to a different part of the palace. He would call his chief of strategy. He would ask a single question: what problem am I trying to solve right now that requires this information? 9 times out of 10, the answer was nothing. The urge wasn't about solving a problem. It was about feeling secure, about creating the illusion of control. This is the part that breaks people. Because you think the goal is confidence. You think the goal is knowing your number and feeling secure. But Marcus knew better. He knew that the number is the insecurity. The moment you have it, you start measuring yourself against it. You start comparing it to last month, to your competitors, to your friend who mentioned their bonus. The number becomes a mirror, and a broken one at that. It shows you everything except what you actually need to know, which is whether your decisions are sound. Here's the genuine mechanism. When you separate your brain from your balance, you're not being ignorant. You're being selective about information. You're saying, I will know this number when I need to make a resource allocation decision. I will not know it when I'm deciding whether to text an ex, whether to panic hire, or whether to sabotage a partnership because I'm feeling scarcity. Information proximity shapes consciousness. Every CEO worth studying operates under this principle, though they don't always name it. But here's where it gets darker. Marcus understood that the redirection rule has a shadow side, because the moment you successfully build this system, the moment you create enough friction that money stops intruding on your thinking, something else happens. You start to become numb to your actual wealth. You stop appreciating it. You start to feel poor even when you're rich. This is the paradox that killed many Roman emperors who came after him. They built the walls too high. They severed the connection between their decisions and their resources so completely that they lost the ability to feel wealthy at all. And a person who feels poor, no matter how much they have, will eventually act poor. They'll hoard. They'll become paranoid. They'll treat their wealth like a wound instead of a resource. Marcus's genius was that he built one more layer beneath the 3 rules. It was a cadence. 1 day per month, always the same day, he would review his accounts completely, not to adjust them, not to optimize, but to remember, to maintain the visceral knowledge that he had enough, that the system was working, that his choices were actually producing resources, not consuming them. This wasn't about motivation or gratitude or any of that soft language. It was about calibration. He needed to know monthly that the separation and friction weren't creating a lie. They were creating clarity. The CEOs who actually last understand this, they don't check daily. They don't check weekly. They check on a fixed cadence, and they do it with a specific question written down beforehand. Has anything changed that would require a change in strategy? If the answer is no, they close the accounts and return to work. If the answer is yes, they make one decision, then leave. They don't linger. They don't optimize. They don't scroll through the numbers like they're reading tea leaves. But here's the trap that even Marcus couldn't escape. And the reason this matters to you now, the moment you know you're doing this, the moment you're aware that you're using a technique to separate yourself from your money, you've already started to perform the technique instead of live it. You start checking with the self-satisfied feeling that you're being wise. You start telling people about your monthly review cadence. You start turning it into identity. And the moment it becomes identity, it becomes another form of the same disease you were trying to cure. You're still letting the number think for you. You're just letting it think a different thought, a more sophisticated one, a stoic one. This is the real lesson. The rule isn't about the mechanics. It's about noticing the moment your relationship with money shifts from necessity to obsession, even obsession disguised as discipline. Marcus understood that true wealth isn't about having more money than your problems. It's about having fewer problems than your attention. It's about training your consciousness to move through your resources the way a skilled navigator moves through water, present, aware, but not pulled. The men who did this best weren't the richest emperors. They were the ones who made peace with the fact that their wealth would always whisper, that it would always want to think for them. And they said yes to the whisper exactly once a month, on schedule, and no every other day. That's not restraint. That's marriage. You're not fighting your money. You're negotiating with it. The hardest part, the part that determines whether this actually changes your life or remains intellectual performance, is accepting this. You will never feel confident about your wealth using this system. You'll feel something stranger. You'll feel empty of opinion. You'll have money and feel neither rich nor poor. You'll be in the position of the emperor, and it will feel like nothing. And that nothingness, that's the clarity. Your wealth is only as wise as your restraint.